When I first heard this remix by Martin Garrix and Space Dogs, my mind was blown. And that meant I had to remake it and of course show you guys how to create a similar result. So I'd say grab your favorite snack and let's dive into it. So first we have this initial layer from Serum. And this is a slap bass preset which is being modified by both changes made inside the plugin as well as effects linked to our channel. I've made some adjustments to the initial synth preset by changing the wavetables to more preferable ones, but the heart and driving force of the sound comes from the plugins being applied to our chain. We have an instance of the free DJM filter to roll off some of the highs from our sound to have a darker tone. I'm then applying an instance of Crush, another free plugin, which helps add some bite to our synth and brings it more forward. Afterward, I'm applying some subtle EQ, high passing below 80 Hz, as our sub bass will be responsible for covering that portion of the frequency spectrum, and otherwise our synth may clash with the sub bass, and we don't want that. I am then applying a DS10 to increase the attack of our synth, as it provides a very good option to make anything you apply it to become more punchy and apparent. Next, we're going to be adding GDR Amp, which is a plugin from Waves, and I found this preset called Drive to Cabinets, which I'm applying super lightly at a mix level of only 10%, but what we are hearing though is a much more gritty sound. Now the next level on our chain is Crucial, and that comes courtesy of the free OTT. And we can hear an immense difference within our synth as we play it with and without OTT. So the OTT really helps exaggerate the grittier sound we're after, but makes our synth so much tighter and lighter. I then have a limiter with a slight increase on the gain to bring the bass more forward. I'm also using an instance of GDR Stomp 2 using the overdrive function, applied lightly, which gently adds a bit more beefiness to our sound. And finalizing the chain, I have an S1 imager to help make the synth sound wider. Second, I'm using this noise layer as an add-on to our bass to help generate more energy in the drop, specifically by only playing some of the notes that are played by the main bass lead. Third, we have another Serum synth that is integral to the foundation of our sound, which is this bass layer that plays the same notes as the noise attack layer. So here's what our first three layers sound like together. Fourth, we have an instance of Diva, whose purpose is to support our bass synth by adding some more body. And this synth in particular was a preset I found in Diva's default library, but I then tweaked the attack settings, making the overall attack a bit slower to help create that whipping sound we hear in the original. Now, there's a whole lot to this bass synth that we are hearing but that we haven't talked about yet, which is the bass bus to which our four previously discussed bass layers are being routed. And there's quite a lot going on this chain, but it's making a huge difference, as we can tell by disabling and then enabling the effects on the bus. So we're starting this bus chain with 1-up Feather and Taped Mellowfy by Arturia for some subtle extra fatness and warmth. Then we're generously applying an affected mushroom pusher by waves, which really adds a lot of drive and character. Next, we're using an EQ to roll off both the bottom end and high end, as well as dynamically boost the region around 140 Hz for some extra warmth and richness. And then the heart and energy of our drop directly comes from the automation being used through the instances of fruity balance and fruity scent we see on the bass bus. And with these effects, things sounded a lot less static and much more interesting. So I'm first using the Fruity Balance plugin to automate the shape of our sound by basically manually drawing our ADSR settings, which in result creates a much tighter, groovier, and controlled presentation of our synth. And second, we're sending our bass bus to a separate reverb channel with the reverb set at 100%, so none of our dry signal comes out of this send channel. Now, crucially, I'm only gradually applying this send by automating its volume slider. And what this does is add an extra touch of atmosphere and breathiness to the bass sound, almost letting the bass breathe within our pattern and also connecting some of the bass notes with one another. And then there's still some other effects on this bass bus, such as a glue compressor to quite heavily compress our bass so that it better sits in the mix and feels less bloated. And in turn, we are saturating our compressed bass signal to make up for some of the volume that was taken away by our compressor, but doing so not just by adding back some gain, but by adding some grit simultaneously. Then there's an instance of Kickstart 2 by Nicky Romero to sidechain our bass to the 4 on the floor kick pattern. And we're applying FabFilter Pro MB to have the bottom end of our bass duck every time our sub bass plays. And this makes sure that the two are not fighting over the same space within the low end of our mix, and that simply makes things cleaner. To also provide some additional support to our synth layer, I'm making a percussion layer, which is composed of a tom layer, a percussive synth layer, and a white noise within Serum. Then fifth and finalizing our synth layer, we have an instance of Omnisphere. And you may be asking, why would be using an Omnisphere guitar in this case? And that's a great question. The goal of adding this is to add some low mids to our mix, and I found this sound to have great potential for that. And then we have our sub bass, which we briefly touched upon before when discussing the multiband sidechain compression. I like using Silent 1 for subs, as there is a great sub bass preset called Deep Sub, which does exactly what the name describes. I'm first applying a 1-up feather to the chain quite heavily to make our subs low end more apparent. Next, I'm using a Magma BB tubes not only to add drive and warmth, but also to add harmonics by adding a little distortion with our knobs. I then have an EQ that is rolling off everything below 30 Hz and the low pass cancelling out anything above 2000 Hz. And I also have a dynamic EQ bell applied, which is boosting the low end a bit to help the sub poke out a bit more. Then we're also using Serum to recreate the synth we hear come in at the second half mark of the drop. And this energetic sound wave white noise combo helps add a bunch of movement and variation to our drop. To create this, I am using the basic sine wavetable found in Serum in conjunction with the white noise function. I'm then applying some hyperdimension, which helps add airiness and width, some subtle distortion, and an EQ with a slight boost in the upper low end. However, the LFO does the majority of the work, creating the pitch bend effect we hear throughout. To learn more about the specifics of this sound, I definitely encourage you to check out Sam Smyer's Shorts tutorial, where he basically covers how to create this bass synth. Amazing content. For mixing, I am using an EQ to high pass the lows, a generous boost to the highs to accentuate the white noise, and rolling off the top portion of the highs so everything sounds more controlled and not overly harsh. I am then increasing the attack and lowering the sustain within the S10 to tighten things up. I have an S1 to widen the sound, a compressor to effectively glue our sound in unison to the bass synth and drums, a Magma BB tubes to help the synth deliver some more depth, and the Valhalla vintage verb to apply some moderate reverb, which helps create atmosphere and additional width. Now, I think we've gone over all the different bass synths and layers that are being used, so let's take a look at the drums. And to recreate the kick from the original, we're using two layers. One of them being from the Barely Alive sample pack on Splice and another from Kashmir's sample pack. The first one is to serve as the main kick, providing the low end information and punch, while our secondary kick is to provide the click and top end. Now for processing of the main kick, I'm beginning with an instance of R-Bass, which helps add an immediate warmth to our low end right around 80 Hz. I'm then following up with a 1-knob feather being applied modestly heavy to help solidify the kick. An EQ to make some minor corrections, a dynamic bell EQ docking around 150 Hz with each kick hit to create a tighter and less boxy feel. There's also a subtle DS10 application to help accentuate the attack of the kick, and some compression to have things sound more compact. Then for the top kick, I have specifically EQ'd out all of the lows, as the primary purpose of this kick is to serve as a top layer to our main kick drum. I'm also applying some distortion from a default plugin found in FL Studio called Fast Distortion, which provides a more apparent and grippier sound to our top kick. And this one is being followed by a DS10 to increase the attack. And lastly, there's an OTT to bring out some of the highs further and emulate a clickier sound. And then there's still some other drum samples that I'll quickly show you. There's a clap on every 2 and 4, several hi-hat layers, some percussion sounds, and a crash. Finally, I'd like to show you some of the effects that are being used in this remake. So immediately before the drop begins, there is a synth shot that acts as a fill, which is coming from Spire. And this particular sound is from the Woe preset found within this plugin. Funnily enough, I share a personal connection with this sound in particular, as this was the synth I used in one of my own tracks called Funk That, which I released on SoundCloud back in 2014. It was picked up by Fedor Legrand, which was pretty cool.
Main and Genovas are two young talents who just started producing tracks. They sent me their latest project. This is Funk That.
I've linked it down below in case you want to hear it. And by the way, also let me know in the comments below if you want to see a video in which I react to or maybe even improve some of my old songs. let me know. Now back to our remake. Within the drop, there are also a couple of one-shot vocal and percussion effects. And the purpose of adding in effects such as these is to help make things more energetic and interesting. And lastly, we also have some vinyl crackle that acts as a fill sweep right before the second synth reveals itself within the drop, which acts as transitional support along with this subtle cashmere sweep into the second part of the drop. So I think we've gone over everything inside the FL Studio session. Let's now listen to the final result. So there you have it, our rendition of a bass house drop similar to the Cocoon remix by Martin Garrix and Space Dogs. Please go ahead and download the free project file, the stems and the MIDI files down below if you want to study everything at your own pace or maybe use a couple elements that you like. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this video in the comments below, and I'd recommend you to subscribe to the channel to become a part of our community where we make a deep dive into the world of music production. Now with that said, I'd like to thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.